Great. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to this session at Seatrade Maritime Middle East on the difficult journey to zero carbon shipping after our own difficult journey to be here. I'm very sorry that I couldn't be there in person in Dubai. I was unable to travel, as was our colleague Panos here, who will shortly be presenting to us all from ABS. Before we get started, we're in kind of a fortunate position, really. During the course of Seatrade Maritime Middle East, we've got quite a few different sessions that touch on this decarbonisation issue. We're the first ones, which means that nobody else has come first and said everything that we're about to say. So that's always pleasant. We also have, after this session, we have some case studies on low carbon shipping, mostly based around wind-assisted propulsion. And then tomorrow, Innovation Norway have a few sessions on the green shift in the maritime sector, alternative fuels and hybrid-powered vessels, and digitalization and AI driving efficiency and sustainabilities. Speaking to Panos just before we started here, I said I'd like to point out before we get into the conversation that this isn't just a shift that's having to be undertaken in the maritime industry. Everything is having to change around us, every other industry at the same time. I think one that I weirdly spend a long time reading up on is farming and food production. We have, as a world, got used to pouring chemicals onto our fields to grow our food, just as we've got used to burning those same chemicals to move everything around the world. So before I introduce Panos to give his presentation to sort of set the scene for us, I'd like to introduce our speakers we have on stage. We have Ida Fredriksson, who is head of Stena Bulk Dubai, Knut Mathiasen, who is managing director of Maritime Capital and Advisory at INTS Consultancy, and Ali Shehab, area manager MEA at DNV. And with all that done, I'll pass over to Panos to set the scene for us. Panos, if you share your presentation now, we should be good to go.
I will do. Is it okay, Gary?
Looks good from here.
Great. Okay. Let me know when I can start.
Far away.
Okay. Thank you. So, hello and good afternoon to all the attendees. My name is Panos Koutsorakis and I am the ABS Director for Sustainability Strategy. I'm based in Singapore. Unfortunately, due to internal traveling restrictions, I couldn't be there with you in person, but at least I have the opportunity to be remotely together with the rest of the panelists and Gary here. I would like, first of all, to give special thanks to the organizer for this last-minute change. Now, I will move forward directly to my presentation, and from my side, I will start my presentation with a few words about sustainability. In line with the subject of, or the topic of this panel, our industry is facing an enormous transformation, and as we are all well aware, there is a lot of uncertainty. So sustainability, which is the hot topic of that period, and it has been introduced in the market. Yeah? Okay. Not only to tackle the environmental challenges, but also to put on the map viable energy efficiency technologies and cost-efficient solutions, but also to assist the maritime sector to remain viable, competitive, and sustainable for the future. So, however, while sustainability has a broad cover spanning across all the ESG elements, the decarbonization has been the primary focus or the primary challenge of the maritime sector. In ABS, we have done a lot of analysis, and in our recent second outlook, we did an analysis and fuel mix projection from 2025 to 2050. So for this particular analysis, we assume two scenarios, the base case scenario and the accelerated one. For both of these scenarios, we have factored in the announced policies. However, the main difference among these two is that for the base case scenario, we have considered only the fuel demand from the shipping industry, while for the accelerated scenario, we have taken into account the fuel demand from at a global scale. There are several interesting findings from this analysis that we did. First of all, based on the base case scenario and the projected fuel mix, we have seen that 40% of this fuel mix is going to be oil-based fuels. 35% is going to be zero carbon fuels, such as ammonia or hydrogen. And the remaining 25% is going to be LNG, LPG, methanol, or biofuel. The interesting finding here is that we see that the oil-based fuels or the fossil fuels will be still there until 2050. And it makes sense because the shipping industry is, or the shipping economy is an economy that is built on carbon and is not, easy to decarbonize an economy such like this. It takes time, it needs a transition, and it cannot be in a glimpse. So the second finding that I can say that if we assume only the base case scenario, the shipping industry might be able to meet the carbon intensity goal of 2030, but might not be able to meet the goal of 2050 to cut the greenhouse gas emissions by 50%. In our analysis, we have seen in order for the shipping industry to achieve the 2050 goal, they need to move from the base case scenario to the accelerated scenario. And to translate that, what does exactly mean the accelerated scenario? It is, first of all, greater fuel share for the zero carbon fuels like hydrogen and ammonia. We will need more policies and regulations to drive this effort, and of course, more synergies across the industry. And I can say, at least for the latter one, that it is very well with a COP26 that the outcome it was more synergies will be required in order to reach our decarbonization goals. Now, moving to the next slide. The pressure that arises from the call to decarbonize our industry is creating an emerging landscape of requirements that do not only have regulatory aspect. The IMO has developed short-term measures in a form of global regulations that they have both a technical and operational element. And that being said, it is the EXI, which is the Energy Efficiency Design Index for the existing fleet, and the CII, which is the Carbon Intensity Indicator. So by the 1st of January 2023, EXI will be applied in a form of the technical filter for all the existing vessels, where actually they have to pass through. The vessels which are not compliant with the EXI, they have to be improved. From the analysis also in the studies that we did in ABS, we have seen that in the majority of the cases, just the EPL will be sufficient, and the EPL is the acronym of the engine power limitation. At the same time, the CII measure will impose a decarbonization trajectory that is not only trajectory that shipping assets will have to follow. And here it's coming the complexity, because the IMO is not the only vehicle that is trying to align the industry with the zero and net carbon goals. The European Commission recently announced a new bucket of policies to boost the emission reduction, while on the other hand, financiers and charterers have developed their own mechanism to track their exposure in terms of the environmental footprint and mitigate future commercial risks. So that is to say, Poseidon Principles and Sea Cargo Charters are the two mechanisms which in a way are aiming to filter the financed and the charter fleet. Now, while in the previous slide we mentioned about the European Commission new policies, here we're having the Fit for 55 program. The Fit for 55 program is an outcome of the Green Deal, and it stands for 55 net emissions reduction by 2030. In this bucket, there are 4 proposals or 4 policies which will affect the shipping indirect or direct. We can say that direct impact for the ships, it is the first 2, which is the emissions trading scheme and the fuel EU, while indirect impact will come from the energy taxation directive and the deployment of the alternative fuels. Now, starting from the ETS system. ETS system is the emissions trading system, which it's well known for a long period in the market. However, European Commission has decided to include the maritime sector for first time. It's going to be a phasing period from 2023 to 2026, and that means for this year that will be implemented a kind of carbon tax, a carbon levy for this year. From 2026 onwards, that is going to be the traditional emissions trading scheme. To add here for the ETS, European Commission is not the only region that is going to include the shipping. USA has started already a process on copying the European MRV legislation. United Kingdom is now also considering including shipping in the new carbon market, while China, in one of its subnational pilot ETS projects, already has included the maritime. Now, moving to the second policy, which is the fuel EU. The European Commission will mandate a specific fuel mix with zero carbon fuels, or it can be just a single zero carbon fuel. In case that the ship is not compliant with this trajectory, there is going to be a penalty in order to incentivize the use of lower carbon fuels. And moving to the latter one, which is the energy taxation directive, which indirectly is going to impact the ships. This is going to be applied on bunker procurers as a fuel levy, as a fuel tax, and that depends of the carbon emission factor of each fuel. The fuel levy is going to be either higher or lower. That means if bunkering fuel in the European region, like the traditional VLCFO, then the fuel levy will be higher. If someone is bunkering biofuels within the European region, fuel levy is going to be lower. And of course, the deployment of the alternative fuels infrastructure, where actually European Commission is trying to incentivize the European ports to develop the infrastructure and the bunkering facilities for wider adoption of lower carbon fuels. Now, moving one step ahead, and an analysis that we did on the potential impact of the short-term measures, IMO short-term measures. On the left-hand side, we have the potential impact of the EXI. On the right-hand side, we have the CII impact. So as we can see, for the most popular commercial ships, the EXI is more or less 88 to 90% of the vessels are not compliant with the EXI at this point of time. However, as previously mentioned, the majority of these ships will comply just with engine power limitation. On the other hand, at the same range, we see vessels are not compliant with the CII. And just to clarify here, when we say not compliant with the CII, we consider as non-compliant vessels that cannot be rated with D or A. This is just an assumption from our side. In this slide, we can see, let's say, the potential impact of European Commission policies or regulations, the ETS and the fuel EU. On the left-hand side, we have the ETS. here we have done a case study for a Kamsarmax vessel, and we have done the assumption of 10% sailing time within European region. So for this particular vessel, we have simulated the same parameters while using different type of fuels: conventional, VLSFO, LNG, methanol, gray ammonia, and green ammonia. If you can see the left-hand chart, for the first three fuels, which is the VLSFO, LNG, and methanol, more or less they stand at the same level. We can see a benefit for the LNG, and that's because of the lower carbon emission factor. While using ammonia, the benefit or the carbon levy that is to be paid in the European Commission is much lower compared to the other fuels. Worth to mention here that ETS system is using the tank-to-wake approach, while moving to the other end for the fuel EU is using well-to-wake approach, and we'll see here the difference. Again, we simulate the same fuels. The interesting finding here is that using gray ammonia, because here with the fuel EU is taking into account the full life cycle of the fuel, then using the gray ammonia, this particular vessel has to pay a greater penalty to the European Commission. Of course, if instead of gray ammonia, this vessel uses green ammonia, then there is no penalty until 2050. Then also we see different approaches for conventional fuel. The penalty will start by 2025 with almost, let's say, 3,000 euro per year, while for the LNG, we see the benefit where the penalty for this particular vessel will start from 2035 and onwards. And while we're speaking about decarbonization, we have categorized the solutions in three buckets, three categories, starting with operational efficiency, solutions like speed optimization, just-in-time, weather routing, and others. The second one, technology improvements, and the third one, alternative fuels. What I would like just to highlight in this slide is that just the operational efficiency as solution cannot be a standalone solution to reach the zero carbon goal. In order to reach our zero carbon goals, we need either fuels, alternative fuels, and I would say zero carbon fuels, or we might need to combine with other technologies like fuel cells. If we approach...
Panos, I'm conscious we have our colleagues on the stage. Would we be able to wrap this up?
Yeah, definitely. I would say yes, and I will go just directly to the last slide to wrap it up, and I would say that decarbonization is not just a goal, it's a business strategy, and as a business strategy you need to have a roadmap that's starting with a benchmarking the fleet, understand where the fleet is standing against the peers, then see what sort of improvements need to be done if needed, and what is the level of investment that might need it. And these two steps, the first two steps, are very critical. So these two critical steps, all going well, will give to the ship owner a greater access to the chartering and financing, either it is for retrofit or new build. And of course, the last step, which is to cascade the ESG over the previous steps. Because, decarbonization, as initially mentioned, is the primary focus and the primary challenge for the industry. But we have always to consider the other two elements, which is the social and governance. And that's all from my side, Gary. Thank you very much.
Great, Panos. Thanks very much. That's, I think, an excellent jumping off point for the discussion of some of the things that we're facing currently and over the coming years. Ida, if I could throw straight to you, what is Stena Bulk doing to move towards decarbonisation, and what are the challenges that it's going to face on the move towards that goal?
Well, first of all, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here. At Stena, we are pioneering innovation, and sustainability excellence is more or less in our DNA. We see it as a crucial element of our business strategy, and we currently constantly pushing boundaries. We are highly committed to technological investments, and we go down multiple pathways at the moment in time. Not every initiative is going to work out as planned, but what we're seeing is that some other players are maybe seeing these technological investments and research as speculative and risky, whilst we are seeing them as progressive steps that will drive our further commercial success. We need to look at technical solutions, but also in combination with operational and commercial solutions. So operationals, that was mentioned before as well, is using more efficient ships and also operating them in a more efficient way. Commercially, we can also look at trying to work with our charterers and have maybe more flexibility on speeds and arrival times, etc. Some of the specific examples that we're working with are a number of alternative fuel projects. We have a biofuel project that we're offering our customers the option to offset with a full biofuel during the whole voyage. We have a big methanol project with dual fuel ships coming into the market next year, and working on a series of other zero carbon fuel options. We also have projects within carbon capture, and working very much with energy efficiency technology, wind assistance, and onboard AI. As a company, we have set up very ambitious targets for ourselves. We are working actively with solutions to reach these targets. By 2035, we will have zero emission ready ships on the water. In 2040, we will have a carbon neutral operation. And in 2050, the aim is to have net zero emission business, including the cargoes that we carry.
Thanks, Ida. That's great. Very much fighting it on multiple fronts by the sound of it. This isn't a single project kind of approach.
No.
We very briefly touched on or mentioned finance as well during Panos' presentation. And I wonder if this is where we might bring in Knut to the discussion. And how does finance tie into all of this? We've already heard here during the event, one speaker said that finance is very much driving the move to decarbonisation. Is that something you'd agree with?
Well, to some degree. Let's look at what the banks are doing here. In 2019, the Poseidon Principles was launched, initially by Citibank, DNB, and SocGen, but there are now actually 28 banks that have signed up to the Poseidon Principles, which is very important for their clients, if you like, and the clients they want to keep. It's all about transparency, accountability, and assessing the ESG journey, if you like, that these companies will need to address. And it's happening. Some say not as quickly as we would like to see, but it is happening. And these banks, the aggregate portfolios they represent is $185 billion. That's significant. And if that accountability is transferred onto their clients, it is, from a banking point of view, a very good initiative and a very good starting point. But it's not enough, and we can come back to that.
Thank you. And finally, Ali, let's get you into the conversation as well. I'm conscious that we've just had one of your competitors had the stage for 10 minutes. I wonder if there's anything much that you wanted to add in from DNV's point of view.
Yeah, I will touch on this in wearing a few hats actually. Well, it's DMV or where I come from. My previous job where I was in a tanker company. But I would first start by challenging the title, the difficult journey. Why do we have to put a hurdle in the way? And I think we should call it the great journey to decarbonization. Right? And this subject has been going on for some time. My colleague from ABS, he touched base on the regulatory side and the development that's happening in various fronts, whether it is IMO or Europe or US and UK as well as China. And very much this is will work in the favor of the journey. But if I touch base on how we see that the total structure of the challenge. So basically we start with our climate change. We can see, or let's say if we go back into what happened in COP26, imagine what's going to happen in COP27, and imagine what's going to happen in COP28, which will be here in the UAE, and hopefully by then we will have some stories to talk about. But that goes in totally in the right direction. Then what that brings a regulatory evolution. You need regulations in place, and IMO really trying its level best through the flag states and the MEPC meetings, and things are happening. Maybe some things need fine-tuning, improvement, but that's ongoing. And then when the regulation comes in, it brings in the need for technological development. Technological development needs R&Ds, digitalization. All of these needs funding. And then, of course, the most important element in all as well is the human resource and development. These are the let's say, all the aspects that really pushing us into the direction where we are. However, what we see as well is, as DMV, we have contributed quite well through collaboration, because where we see is collaboration is the fuel for the journey, and we have done various, as the examples have been mentioned by Ida. We also collaborated with a lot of partners within the industry, where we looked into how the use of alternative fuels, etc. But as well, we have issued various reports. Our latest ETO was issued in September, Energy Transition Outlook, September 2021, and also our last report, which was the Pathways to Decarbonization, which gives our client and the industry what is our view in this regard and how we can really work together in reaching the journey in the future. May I?
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I just want to also recap something on what my colleague from ABS, we talked as far as for the ships, if they want really to reach to the aspirations of the decarbonization level, where we talked about is use of data and energy saving devices as one, i.e. where we look here is at the ship, whether it is internal or external, you start modifying it and improve the operations. That's one way. The second way is the use of electrification, and that is you could sort of cold ironing, improve your electrical system on board, etc. And the third one was the use of carbon neutral fuels, which are alternative fuels in this case. This is still yet in the progress, because you need to compensate the existing carbon budget through the use of more than 5 million barrels of bunker fuel that you're using, and therefore how you're going to compensate that through the carbon neutral fuel. But I think also on a personal level, there is another element that we need to add into this, and there you could reach there through the carbon capturing systems that will come in the future, because this would be the quickest solution into decarbonizing the emissions of the ships.
Thank you. And Panos, is there anything you want us to say in response to that?
I agree that it's it's not a difficult journey, but for sure it's a journey to zero carbon shipping that does not have shortcuts. I mean, to achieve the zero carbon approach needs a lot of effort, and most important, we will need sufficient production of zero carbon fuels such as ammonia and hydrogen. And zero carbon, that means green fuels. And at this point of time, the electricity from renewables is scaling up, that's for sure, that is a fact, but not yet at the price and not yet enough power supply to cover the market needs. I mean, for the production of the green fuels. That is the only I have to add here.
Sure, and I perhaps start with a bit of a softball question to Ida, and perhaps a slightly more difficult one coming your way. I've spoken in previous conferences about the idea of there being a conflict between decarbonisation and the transport of crude oil and oil products. I wonder, is there a green way to go about this business? Is there a long-term future for that business? And is there any opportunities for a tanker operator in a decarbonising market?
Thank you. I would say, to start with, the purpose and the contribution, as a company, our purpose and contribution to the society is to supply the world with energy and resources that it needs. Sustainability is about the environment, yes, but it's also about making sure that people all around the world can, heat their homes, they have food to eat, and they can get to work. So the energy that we transport today is mostly oil and oil-derived products, but the future will come in different shapes and forms, and our philosophy is to engage in that transportation while continuing to transport oil in the most sustainable way, as long as the world needs it. We always want to innovate and explore every solution to decarbonize, and it's a requirement, it's not really an option, but we need to bring all our customers along with us on the journey. We can't decarbonize without a drive from our customers. But we have pledged to be a net zero emission business by 2050. A net zero emission business means that we're not only going to take our own emissions, be accountable for our own emissions, but we're also going to look at the cargoes that we carry, and we definitely believe that there is a future for tanker business carrying non-fossil fuels.
I think that's really a key point, because I think at the moment, if you were to be skeptical all along the supply chain, people might argue that there's a certain amount of passing the buck when it comes to carbon emissions, and trying to divvy things up so that one company doesn't look as bad as another, but actually accepting sort of mutual responsibility for emissions might be a very key thing in the future. Knut, I wonder how these sort of bigger changes affect the finance side of things. It is quite a big societal change that we're about to undergo, and there must be some nervous onlookers wondering how they predict things like an energy mix 20, 30 years down the road and its effect on shipping.
Yes, how should we say? I've noticed a change in attitude with banks now for financing crude oil tankers, for example. It is much more attractive than to be associated with financing wind farm installation vessels and so forth. And we've seen a number of IPOs in that sector where it's oversubscribed in 10 minutes. And this is a sign of the times. We're struggling now to get finance for certain FSO projects that I'm currently working on. It's banks are no longer so keen on financing crude oil storage or transport, and it's a thought, isn't it? In terms of where banks are going here now, it's very clear that a portion of the funding here has to come from new sources of finance, like green bonds for example, that we've seen for also tanker companies like Odfjell in Norway successfully launched a green bond issue not so long ago, and so on. And it's all about the mission to decarbonize and results they are showing on the way. And this appears to be the way forward for many banks to follow. And I think this is happening not only gradually, but it's noticeable how many banks now possibly turn their back to the dirty oil transport, shall I call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, a quote we had from a previous conference was, who in their right mind would finance a VLCC at the moment? And I think that sort of brings the scope, the questions that we need to answer over the coming years. Just finally, we're not far out of COP26 at the moment. I wonder, Ali, if you have any thoughts on whether COP26 had much of an impact of the shipping sector, and did it change the scope or the urgency of what we face when it comes to reaching zero carbon?
Well, the COP26, following the COP26, there was a lot of noise to the ear, or let's say music to the ear, happened after that by different bodies and different venues. But then really it all translated, if you move forward from after the COP26 and you go to the latest MEPC meeting, and that's where the real results were there. Actually, what the industry was hoping is for that $5 billion fund to be approved by the flag states, and therefore that did not happen. Then this translated what kind of commitment is there, and you know what happened in COP26 is just revealed in the MEPC meeting, and therefore people were disappointed, and yet this to be seen. However, you know, there is a bit of dilemma here. We always look at the IMO in total isolation from other industries, and that is really should not be the case. While IMO have set the regulation in place, and then the whole system is working and gearing up to that or to those targets, the other industries also imposing, like the banking sector, they imposing their requirements, which assisting the ambitions. We have other environmental parties and bodies, they taking actions and cases against oil majors in order, you know, to decap their emissions, and so on and so on.
Agreed, Ali. I'm very sorry, but we have a sort of a technical difficulty on this side, and I'm going to have to wrap up and thank all of the panelists for their insights so far today.